Good afternoon. Thanks, everybody, for joining us for this special edition of the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. We're going to cover the latest information from the governor's budget that literally just came out a couple hours ago. We're going to give you what we know, give you some big picture perspectives, and also foreshadow some of the other offerings ACSA is going to provide here in the next coming hours to try to get you informed on everything the governor has announced. With that, the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break starts now.
And just a couple of moments after 1 o'clock. Hi there, Edgar. Welcome to this special edition of the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, along with Edgar Zazwata, ACSA Senior Director of Policy and Governmental Relations. I'm Naj and Edgar, ACSA Senior Director of Marketing and Communications. Welcome on a Monday, a special edition, budget edition of the lunch break. Edgar, how are you today?
I'm happy to see your face right now. I mean, I thought I was going solo. I think it's the sign of the times. I was about to tell our viewers, as I'm sure everybody's experiencing. Naj, I understand you're in COVID protocols, as we like to, as they talk about it. So I know it was some developments here in the last few minutes, but I appreciate that you made the effort. You're on.
Hey, you know what, Edgar? This is, as I've told you many times, this is like my favorite day of the year here at ACSA. We really get to flex a little muscle here at ACSA, and yes. About 40 minutes ago, I was sent home due to some COVID protocol issues, and so here I am. But happy to be here at the desk. I just want to give you a little bit of a preview of what we've got going. ACSA's interim executive director Marc Ecker will join us in a couple of minutes to give his perspective. Coming up at 3:30 today, Edgar and the governmental relations team will have a webinar with full details and analysis. Edgar, can you just preview that webinar coming up at 3:30? Because I know our members received the login information in an email within the last hour, but can you just give everybody an idea of what's coming up at 3:30?
Yeah, at 3:30, and this is kind of a development over the last few budget cycles where, you know, we do this, and obviously we're going to give you a little bit of our initial impressions, and I know we're probably going to get bombarded with questions, and people probably get frustrated with us because we're not going to answer every single one of them here in the short amount of time that we have together. But at 3:30, not only myself, but the real experts on our ACSA government relations team and some friends, we like to bring in partners from school services, capital advisors. We're going to go a little bit more in depth on, you know, here's what we know. One of the things we pride ourselves in, this thing has just come out, and yeah, we get inklings and we get a little bit advanced, but we don't have all the details. We get it when when the governor gets up to the podium and starts talking. So we don't pretend to have every detail. But the one thing we've realized, especially in these early hours, folks are just trying to figure out what's what, and especially in a year like this. So we do try to get on there and give as much information as we have, answer as many questions. So I would invite everybody. We'll record it and put it out. But those that are joining now, if we don't get to questions right now, 3:30, we'll put the information, I'm sure, in the chat here on how to log on. But 3:30, kind of anybody that wants to participate in this ACSA webinar, we'll do a little bit of a summary and really try to answer as many questions as we can over that 1 hour period.
Yeah, let me just give a couple of details, Edgar, and then we'll just hit it off. What I'm reading is a $213 billion general fund budget based on a $45.7 billion surplus, $34.6 billion in reserves. The governor mentioned a $9.7 billion school stabilization reserve, which I'll ask you about in a second. Edgar, can you give some details, Prop 98, just some of your initial reactions and biggest takeaways from the governor's proposal?
Yeah, as it often happens, you know, and this year it's legitimate. The headlines are always positive. Let's put that, you know, with the exception of years where they really try to brace us for cuts or whatnot. The messaging here, especially in the early hours, always from the governor's office, regardless who the governor is always the very positive. And they always lead with the education figures because it makes such a significant part of the budget. Some of the numbers that I wrote down, this is a $213 billion general fund budget. Of that, $102 billion is to Prop 98. They talk about the increase of $8.2 billion. I know these numbers get huge, but all told, it's a positive year. It's a positive year in terms of the revenues that we're seeing, this uptick of funding, of revenues, and that's obviously has a trickle-down effect on our education budget. The big caveat, always give, especially in January, is that this is only a proposal. And we're only in January, right? So that means two things. One, the governor has to work with the legislature on many of these proposals that we're going to talk about. And then two, what we all know, all of us that follow this, is that in May, they do a revision of the budget. So they will take a look at the revenues at that time. And the governor gave this caveat many times during the press conference, which he might still be talking. I'm not sure. The governor is known for being he has a fair amount of things to say. So apologies to Governor Newsom if we're talking over his press conference at this point. But he gave the caveat that he does think that there's a chance that the budget could look different in May. So take that for what it's worth. A lot of good, positive developments, I would say, in the proposal this morning.
And let me just let you folks know that we have today Big on Budget coming up Wednesday on our regularly scheduled ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. We have John Gray from School Services of California. He will be here to also give his feedback on the budget as we continue to spend the next hours and days dissecting all of the pieces to it. I do want to bring in ACSA's interim executive director, Marc Ecker, in for his initial analysis. Marc is joining us, I believe, from Southern California. He is not having to rush 40 minutes from the city into the sticks to get on here and give his initial thoughts. But Marc, honored to have you here on the show. You've had an opportunity to hear what the governor had to say. Your initial thoughts as we are now a couple of hours out from the announcement.
Well, Naj and Edgar, thanks a lot for inviting me to join you on this release of the governor's budget. I did want, first of all, it's hard not to look at this introductory step in the budget development as not great, very, very positive. A lot of money, a lot of concern, a lot of priority. Focused on P-12 education. These are all good things. I did want to, just sort of highlight what Edgar had said. This is the start, as you all know, of the entire process from where we start with a proposal, and in June, we hopefully get a budget signed. There will be changes. We don't know what tomorrow brings. We don't know what next month brings. We don't know where we're going to be sitting in June. But Naj, I am really thrilled at the numbers, and it clearly indicates to me that the governor and his staff realize the critical needs that public schools have out there. And I like it. I like it a lot. I think it's a good first step. As a CBO, a former CBO, as well as a superintendent, I love the discretionary funding and I love the COLA. So, these are all good things. And, the $102 billion in Prop 98 is a big, big part of the overall budget. So clearly public education is a very, very high priority with the governor, and we greatly appreciate it.
Hey, Marc, I want to ask you, because you just mentioned your lens as a CBO. There was something that the governor mentioned about this budget is balanced, and the budget is balanced over the next 3 years. He said, quote, balancing with future in mind, unquote. I want to ask you if you can put your CBO hat back on to see that the governor has put something together for a budget proposal with an eye to the future, not just for public education, but just the state in general. How positive do you think that is as we make another turn from COVID, but we have this budget surplus?
Well, I mean, clearly the decisions that we have made over the past several years with the present governor and even the former governor in trying to establish a funding medium for what we propose. In the past, in my career, it was not surprising that we would get great promises, but those promises really fell on the fact that there was no plans to fund them. so to answer your question directly, I think the fact that we have a budget surplus, the fact that we've got a reserve, the fact that there is a plan to fund this amount of money makes it more realistic, and quite frankly gives you confidence that we're not going to be seeing reductions in funding to make up the lost revenue. So Naj, I feel really good about it, because we've all heard about the rainy day funds, we've all heard about the reserves, and I think it's coming back to roost right now. And we might be even benefiting a little bit, because we are in the midst of a pandemic, and the governor realizes it, and schools and the children we serve are the ones who are the most vulnerable. So we might be, during this budget time, getting a little bit of an advantage over those situations.
Hey, Edgar, you and I have sat down many years prior to COVID with the top 5 of the budget, and give us your insight right now. Top 5 takeaways from this budget, things our members and educators in general statewide need to be looking out for.
Yeah, no, I always appreciate trying to think about it. Obviously, this budget, and when there's money, there's going to be a lot of programs. And I always like to joke, for all the good things, our job is to find the things that we don't like, on behalf of our members. And we'll undoubtedly find some of that in the hours and in the days to come. And you guys aren't shy, so you'll let us know what it is that you don't like about the budget, right? And it helps our advocacy. With that said, yeah, I've been thinking about this since it's come out. And, some of the themes. First is that, I took away something that I saw the governor talked about this, but it also was in his budget summary. And I thought it was noteworthy how they explained this. That first, that effective implementation for ambitious programs, which they're acknowledging a lot of the programs that they've tried to create over the last couple of years are very ambitious. TK, extended learning, universal meals. That effective implementation of ambitious programs requires consistent investment. And I think that's one of the overarching pieces of this budget, is that it's taking things that were especially created last year and trying to follow up and send resources to those programs. So I think that's first and foremost one of the things that stuck out in my head. 2, and I'm always conscious for this, about places where they may have listened to us, listened to you folks, especially to our educators. And one noteworthy example here is on the impact of declining enrollment, whether it be because of the pandemic, or we had a lot of districts that were already facing declining enrollment before the pandemic. And, and we'll dig in whether this is the right solution or not. But in terms of declining enrollment, we've heard a lot of our folks talking about the impacts of ADA, impacts of just having less students. So they are proposing some changes to how we fund schools on a year-to-year basis. Right now, you take the grader over your prior year or your current year. They're throwing in there an option to look at a 3-year average. So we'll dig in onto that. But I think I take some solace on the fact that they've listened to us and listened to you folks on that piece. It's hard not to, and sometimes it's easy to overlook it because it's the staple now. But LCFF, they made a pretty big investment there. So I would say the third one is just the amount of money that they're sending to LCFF, which I think is upwards of over $3 billion, which I think is important. I think that's something that will be at the focal point of our advocacy. And alongside with that they're proposing, as Marc noted, a pretty substantial COLA of over 5%, 5.03, if I'm not mistaken. I may have that number a little bit wrong. All that to say, it's in that they take credit that this is the highest COLA in the 5 point, Michael to my rescue, 5.33% COLA for LCFF, that this is the highest COLA in the post-Great Recession period. And then the last two I would say is special education. There's another allocation to special education funding. With that said, and I'm sure this is what's going to get a lot of attention, and we may hear from some folks, there's a lot of policy changes that they're proposing about how you make those calculations, how you utilize the SELPAs, how we're going to distribute some of the funding. So I think that's going to be a noteworthy piece of conversation. And then lastly, of the big themes is independent study. And really, what is the next school year going to look like? I think we talked a lot in the last couple of weeks about how some of the policies are really coming to bear now, where when some of those decisions were being made, one could question whether they anticipated a surge like we're seeing here in January. I don't think anybody there was talk of variants or whatnot. I don't think anyone saw Omicron coming. So with that said, what is going to be the options for virtual learning in the next school year in 22-23? The governor has said that they want to retain independent study as an option. They're trying to give us a little bit more flexibility on some of the pieces that they've known have been problematic. My guess is, and this is having a pulse on our members, my guess is that we're going to want to see more changes, that the independent study has been problematic on that end. So I think, like Marc stated, and this is our job. This will just be the beginning of the conversation on this end, but I think we may want to see more pieces there. You asked me for 5. I'll just say, one parting comment on this. There's a lot of other pieces. I see questions about adult ed. I see questions about a number of programs. I think this is where we're going to need to dig into the nitty gritty. They're proposing some COLAs across some of the categorical programs. There's a lot of earmarks all over the place. So I think this is where we'll have to see what is the impact of all of these pieces.
Yeah, and want to remind everybody, coming up at 3:30 today, the entire ACSA governmental relations team will hold a webinar. It's a statewide webinar for all educators, not just ACSA members, but educators statewide, which will have additional details about the budget. Edgar's team is working right now to dissect more of that budget. So the entire GR team and some special friends will be there at 3:30. You can see the link right there. We've also put that into our chat and comment section. Nicole Newman, I see a question there, but we've had a number of questions and want to remind you that we aren't really going to be taking a lot of questions here. That will be at 3:30. But Edgar, let me just ask you really quick. Nicole Newman asks any news about ADA hold harmless. I know that we've talked about that over the last couple of weeks, but anything that you've heard specific to that?
Yeah, not a huge surprise. The governor did not explicitly call for a hold harmless. And this is we anticipated this, right? Just because there had been some hesitation to extend that outright. I think this is why they're opening up this conversation about what are some other things that they can do to kind of mitigate, whether it be drops in ADA or look at some more of these more systemic declines in enrollment, whether it be because of the pandemic or just some of the natural trends that we had already been seeing. The one piece that Nicole has brought up is, and this is a real issue for a number of districts, is that while there's a lot of talk of declining enrollment, there's also some areas in the state that are growing, right? And that's one piece that I think we're going to have to dig into. I didn't see anything that stood out that targeted this directly. As the governor pointed out, and we're going to point out over and over today, that this is the first step, and this is where some of these areas are going to identify, but it's just the beginning of the conversation, I would say.
I want to ask both of you this question, and Marc, I'll have you start. Obviously, when we talk about key issues moving forward towards the May revise, there are so many. The governor talked about, 5 existential pieces of the budget that were kind of serving as a guide for him. But for you, key issues as we head towards the May revision. Obviously, testing and COVID is probably number one, but anything in particular you think is a key issue heading into May?
Naj, I'm going to probably piggyback a little bit on some of the comments that Edgar made. I think that as this budget develops, and remember, this is just sort of the opening salvo. This is like in a courtroom, your opening argument. Very good. We're sitting very, very strong. But I would think there needs to be more discussion on adult education. I think we're going to hear a little bit about that. But clearly, we're going to be hearing about those things that are COVID affected. Edgar made mention a little bit about virtual teaching. Where are we going to be? We know the challenges with that. And we know the data hasn't been the greatest, saying to us that, children, especially those from marginalized populations, are not progressing as well as they should and are losing ground with virtual education for a number of reasons. So I think we're going to hear a little bit about that. I think we need to hear a little bit about ADA and those districts that are losing enrollment and monies as a result of the rise of absenteeism. And I think we're going to be hearing things that, quite frankly, have been brought up a little bit by teacher associations and our bargaining groups regarding those individuals in their associations that have used up their sick leave. What happens with that? Is there going to be a hold harmless with that as well? Along with ongoing funding for some of these discretionary programs. Those would be the ones that I would think we're going to hear about.
And Edgar, what about you? Key issues as we head towards May revise?
Yeah, I mean, I think COVID's going to continue to, I think, dominate the conversation. And I think keeping an eye on whether the budget outlook will be as positive as it is now in May. I know that there is at least some caveats about looking at the stock market and what could, how that could impact just our general fund revenues. As we talk about all the time, the state is so reliant on our highest earners in the state. So I think just making sure that some of the volatility that we've seen, what is going to be the impact a few months from now. So I think that's a big one. And I think, like Marc said, I think some of these conversations about what is virtual learning going to look like in the following year. So nobody's asked the question yet about some of these funding systems. I know we're talking about declines, whether it be growth and, or some of these specific programs. Is there going to be the appetite to make more drastic changes? On last week's show, we talked about enrollment-based funding and how there's some proposals out there to move that forward. We haven't even, it's the second week of January, we haven't even talked about some of the policy pieces that will have implications also on all of this, whether there be vaccine mandates and, what do those conversations look like? So I think, first step in the process, I think there's a lot here to unpack and just see where we go from now.
Let me ask this one final question to both of you. Marc, you've been involved in Legislative Action Day for many years, had the opportunity to advocate across the street at the state capitol. From your role as a superintendent through that lens, how important is it for educators to get involved in this budget process and have those discussions with people across the street?
Well, I feel, Naj, that it is critically important. I think legislators listen to the people in the field. They certainly listen to people within their own districts. They listen to voters. The bottom line here is that you're going to, if you're able to share your voice, and if you're able to be and communicate with your legislator, I think it has a critical importance. And we have seen that, Naj, over the years.
And Edgar, let me ask you about pathways to advocacy.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the reasons I'm sure people are catching on to this, because I want to encourage the behavior, is noting where we do believe the state is listening on some of these pieces, right? Whether it be, one of the things I didn't put in my top 5 were pension obligations, that there is, and we'll have to look at the details of how that's going to work. But the governor is proposing another investment to kind of help with some of those pension obligations. There's been no shortage of voices on our administrators from our educational leaders talking about that subject. So that's one. Talking about the concerns about testing. One of the pieces they're also putting in money to get more tests to schools specifically. So that's another one. I noted hearing some of the concerns about the impact of declines in enrollment because of the pandemic. So all that to say is our voice is very important. And we've shown over the last couple of years, while we're never going to be completely content with always the outcome of these policy decisions, I think we need to continue to use the avenues of, just building relationships with our legislators, taking those opportunities to get involved through ACSA, whether it be our Legislative Action Day or when we put out these alerts. We try to be mindful of not going to that well every time we have anything that's out there that we need to have advocacy on, because we know how tough of a year, especially this is. But when we do call out to say, hey, we need to make sure our educator voices are heard on this policy decision, really trying to meet those calls to action, I would say.
And folks, we appreciate you putting questions into our chat. Edgar and his team monitoring those, and that will be part of that 3:30 webinar from Edgar and the entire ACSA governmental relations team. Again, the link to that webinar is in our comments section. We hope you are with us for that very detailed analysis, Edgar's team, and some special guests, as Edgar likes to say. Folks, thank you so much for being with us here on this special edition of the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. We'll see you again Wednesday at our normally scheduled 1 p.m. time, and we'll see you at 3:30 today with that GR webinar. Have a great rest of the day, and we'll see you this afternoon.